Welcome to True Crime Cases, where we delve into the darkest corners of human nature. Maria, a newlywed cheerleader whose honeymoon ended in unspeakable tragedy. Maria was the kind of person who lit up every room she walked into. A former high school cheerleader. With a megawatt smile and an infectious laugh, she had a way of making everyone around her feel special. Her life seemed like a fairy tale, especially when she married her college sweetheart Ezra, in a stunning beach ceremony that looked like it was plucked straight out of a magazine. The photos from that day were breathtaking. Maria, in a flowing white gown, her golden hair catching the sunlight, and Ezra, tall and handsome, gazing at her like she was the only person in the world. Friends and family often referred to them as the golden couple, the kind of pair that made you believe in true love. Maria was bubbly, kind, and full of life, while Ezra was charming, ambitious, and seemingly devoted to her. Their social media feeds were a curated gallery of their love story, filled with romantic dates, adventurous trips, and heartfelt captions that made their followers swoon when the couple announced their honeymoon destination, a luxurious adults-only resort on a remote tropical island. It seemed like the perfect way to start their life together. The resort was the epitome of paradise, with private villas nestled in lush greenery, pristine beaches, and crystal-clear waters. Maria couldn't stop talking about it. In the weeks leading up to the trip, she posted countdowns on her Instagram stories, sharing her excitement with friends and followers. The day they arrived, Maria uploaded a photo of the two of them standing in front of their villa, arms wrapped around each other, with the caption, "Forever starts here." It was a moment that seemed to capture the essence of their love, pure, joyful, and full of promise. But beneath the surface of this idyllic scene, there were subtle cracks that few noticed. Staff at their resort observed that Lucas seemed tense, even irritable during their first day. He snapped at Maria over small things like her taking too long to get ready or her chatting with other guests at the pool. Maria, ever the optimist, brushed it off, laughing it away as wedding stress, or like she was used to Ezra's occasional mood swings and had learned to navigate them with patience and understanding. Her friends had warned her about his temper in the past, but Maria always defended him, insisting that he was just passionate and that their love was strong enough to overcome any challenges. That first evening, the couple enjoyed a romantic dinner on the beach, complete with candlelight and a private serenade from a local musician. Maria posted a video of the moment, her face glowing with happiness. But as the night wore on, things took a darker turn. Witnesses later recalled hearing raised voices coming from their villa. Though no one thought much of it at the time, arguments between couples weren't uncommon, especially in the high-pressure environment of a honeymoon. The next morning, the resort staff grew concerned when Maria and Ezra failed to show up for their scheduled breakfast. When a maid entered the villa to check on them, she made a horrifying discovery. Maria's lifeless body lay on the bedroom floor, her face and body showing signs of a brutal beating. The room was in chaos. Furniture overturned, broken glass scattered across the floor, and blood spattered on the walls. Ezra was sitting on the porch, his clothes stained with blood, staring blankly into the distance. When questioned, he claimed he had woken up to find Maria dead and insisted he had no idea what had happened. The news of Maria's death sent shockwaves through the resort and beyond. How could something so tragic happen to a couple who seemed so perfect? As investigators began to piece together the events of that night, they uncovered a story far more complicated and far darker than anyone could have imagined. The golden couple's fairy tale had turned into a nightmare, and the truth behind Maria's death would reveal secrets that no one saw coming. The discovery of Maria's body sent shockwaves through the tranquil resort, shattering the illusion of paradise. Local police arrived swiftly, their presence a stark contrast to the serene surroundings. The scene inside the villa was one of chaos: overturned furniture, shattered glass, and blood spatter staining the walls. Maria's body lay on the bedroom floor, her injuries indicating a violent and sustained attack. Ezra, her new husband, was found sitting on the villa's porch, his clothes smeared with blood. His demeanor was eerily calm, almost detached, as he recounted his version of events to the officers. He claimed he had woken up to find Maria dead, and insisted he had no knowledge of what had happened from the outset. Investigators found Ezra's story difficult to believe. His clothes were heavily stained with blood, yet it claimed he had been asleep in the living room when the attack occurred. The blood spatter patterns in the bedroom suggested a violent struggle, and the positioning of Maria's body indicated she had been attacked while trying to defend. Her self-security footage from the resort added another layer of suspicion. It showed Ezra leaving the villa late at night just hours before Maria's body was discovered. He returned about an hour later, looking disheveled and agitated. When confronted with the footage, Ezra denied ever leaving the villa, further deepening the investigators' doubts. As the police dug deeper into the couple's background, a darker picture of Ezra began to emerge. Interviews with friends and family revealed that Ezra had a history of controlling behavior and explosive temper tantrums. Maria's closest friends shared that she had confided in them about his jealousy and possessiveness, particularly when other men paid attention to her. She had brushed off their concerns, believing that marriage would mellow him out and that their love was strong enough to overcome his flaws. One friend recalled the particularly troubling incident where Ezra had become enraged after seeing Maria laugh at a joke made by a Molly coworker. He had accused her of flirting and had given her the silent treatment for days. The investigation also uncovered troubling details about Ezra's past. A former girlfriend came forward revealing that Ezra had been physically abusive during their relationship. She described him as charming and attentive at first, but his behavior had gradually become more controlling and violent. She had eventually left him after he shoved her during an argument, leaving her with a bruised arm. Her testimony painted a stark contrast to the image of the doting husband Ezra presented to the world. Meanwhile, forensic evidence began to tell its own story. The blood on Ezra's clothes was analyzed, and while most of it matched Maria's, there were traces of another person's DNA mixed in. This discovery raised new questions. Who else had been in the villa that night, and what role had they played in Maria's death? Investigators expanded their search, scouring the resort grounds for any clues. Their efforts paid off when they found a blooded shirt hidden in a dumpster near the villa. The DNA on the shirt matched a local man named Charles, who worked as a handyman at the resort. When questioned, Charles admitted to being at the villa that night, but claimed he'd been hired by Ezra to scare Maria. According to Charles, Ezra had become enraged after seeing Maria flirt with another guest at the resort's bar. Earlier that evening, he wanted to teach her a lesson and had paid Charles to intimidate her. Charles insisted he never intended to harm Maria, let alone kill her. He described how Ezra had flown into a rage during the confrontation, attacking Maria himself when she fought back. Charles claimed he had tried to stop Ezra, but had fled in panic when he realized the situation was spiraling out of control. This shocking revelation turned the case on its head. What had initially seemed like a straightforward case of domestic violence now appeared to be a premeditated act, with multiple players involved. The investigators faced a new challenge, untangling the web of lies and half-truths to uncover the full truth behind Maria's death. As they pieced together the evidence, one thing became clear. The golden couple's fairy tale had been a carefully constructed facade, hiding a reality far more sinister than anyone could have imagined. The discovery of Charles's involvement added a shocking twist to the investigation, turning what had seemed like a straightforward case into a complex web of lies and manipulation. Charles described how he had reluctantly agreed, believing it would be a simple scare tactic. He claimed he had entered the villa late at night, as instructed by Ezra, and had confronted Maria in the bedroom. But things quickly spiraled out of control. Maria, terrified and confused, had fought back, screaming for help. Charles insisted he had never intended to hurt her. But Ezra, who had been watching from the sideline, had suddenly snapped in a fit of rage. Ezra had grabbed a nearby object, a heavy lamp according to Charles, and began attacking Maria. Charles claimed he had tried to intervene, but Ezra's fury was uncontrollable, overwhelmed by the violence. Charles had fled the villa, leaving behind the bloodied shirt that would later become a key piece of evidence. Forensic analysis supported parts of Charles's story. The blood on the shirt found in the dumpster matched both Maria's DNA and Charles, confirming his presence at the scene. The broken lamp in the bedroom covered in blood and fingerprints was identified as the likely murder weapon. Ezra's fingerprints were found on the lamp, further implicating him in the attack. However, investigators still faced the challenge of determining the extent of Charles's involvement. Was he merely a pawn in Ezra's plan, or had he played a more active role in Maria's death? As the investigation continued, more details about Ezra's behavior in the days leading up to the murder came to light. Staff at the resort recalled seeing him pacing nervously often on his phone and snapping at Maria over minor issues. One employee remembered overhearing a heated argument between the couple the night before the murder, though they had dismissed it as typical newlywed tension. Maria's phone recovered from the villa revealed a series of text messages that painted a troubling picture of their relationship in the weeks before. The wedding Ezra had sent increasingly controlling and accusatory messages questioning Maria's loyalty and demanding to know where she was at all times. Maria's responses were patient but tinged with frustration as she tried to reassure him while maintaining her independence. The most damning evidence against Ezra, however, came from his own financial records. Investigators discovered that he had taken out a substantial life insurance policy on Maria just months before their wedding. The policy named him as the sole beneficiary, raising suspicions that Maria's death had been premeditated for financial gain. This revelation added a killing layer of calculation to the case, suggesting that Ezra's jealousy and rage may have been part of a larger, more sinister plan. Charles, meanwhile, struck a deal with prosecutors. In exchange for his testimony, he pleaded guilty to manslaughter, admitting his role in the events that led to Maria's death, but maintaining that he had never intended for her to be harmed. His cooperation provided crucial insights into Ezra's mindset and actions, helping to build a stronger case against him as the pieces of the puzzle came together. The investigators were left with a haunting question. How had Maria, a vibrant and beloved young woman, ended up in such a tragic situation? The answer lay in the dark undercurrents of her relationship with Ezra, a relationship that had seemed perfect on the surface, but was riddled with control, jealousy, and violence. The case was no longer just about solving a murder. It was about uncovering the truth behind the facade of a fairy tale romance and holding those responsible accountable for their actions. The revelation sent shockwaves through Maria's community, leaving her friends and family grappling with grief and anger. They had trusted Ezra, believing he was the man who would make Maria happy. Now they were forced to confront the painful reality that the person they thought they knew was capable of such unimaginable cruelty. As the investigation moved toward trial, the world watched, waiting for justice to be served. For Maria C. Kean, the cheerful, bright-eyed newlywed whose life had been tragically cut short, the trial of Ezra became a media sensation, drawing attention from across the country. The courtroom was packed every day with reporters, curious onlookers, and Maria's grieving family and friends filling the seats. The case had all the elements of a gripping true crime story. A beautiful young victim, a seemingly perfect marriage, and a husband with a dark side. As the proceedings began, the prosecution laid out their case with meticulous precision, painting Ezra as a manipulative and jealous man who had orchestrated Maria's murder. The prosecution's opening statement was chilling. They described how Ezra's controlling behavior had escalated in the months leading up to the wedding, culminating in the violent attack that ended Maria's life. They presented evidence of the life insurance policy Ezra had taken out on Maria, emphasizing the thin financial motive behind the crime. The broken lamp, covered in blood and fingerprints, was displayed as the murder weapon, and forensic experts testify that the blood spatter patterns in the villa were consistent with a brutal, sustained attack. Charles, their sword handyman, was a key witness for the prosecution. He took the stand and recounted the events of that fateful night in harrowing detail. He described how Ezra had hired him to intimidate Maria, how the situation had spiraled out of control, and how Ezra had ultimately been the one to deliver the fatal blows. Charles's testimony was corroborated by the blooded shirt found in the dumpster, as well as security footage showing him entering and leaving the villa around the time of the murder. The defense, however, fought back fiercely. They argued that Charles was the real killer, pointing to his criminal record and his admission of being at the scene. They painted him as a desperate man who would say anything to avoid a life sentence, suggesting that he had acted alone and that Ezra was an innocent bystander caught up in a tragic situation. Ezra himself took the stand, maintaining his innocence and tearfully describing his love for Maria. He claimed that Charles had attacked Maria without his knowledge, and that he had been too shocked and terrified to intervene. But the prosecution was ready to dismantle Ezra's story. They presented text messages between Ezra and Maria, revealing his controlling and jealous behavior. Friends and family members testified about his temper and his history of volatile relationships. The former girlfriend who had come forward earlier in the investigation took this stand, recounting her own experiences of abuse at Ezra's hands. Her testimony was particularly damning as it showed a pattern of behavior that contradicted Ezra's image as a devoted husband. Perhaps the most emotional moment of the trial came when Maria's parents took the stand. Her mother, fighting back tears, described Maria as a kind, vibrant young woman who had been full of life and dreams. She spoke of the pain of losing her daughter and the betrayal they felt upon learning the truth about Ezra. Her testimony left few dry eyes in the courtroom and underscored the human cost of the crime as the trial progressed. Evidence against Ezra became overwhelming. The jury was presented with a mountain of forensic evidence, witness testimonies, and financial records that all pointed to his guilt. The defense's attempts to shift the blame onto Charles fell flat, as the prosecution effectively demonstrated that Ezra had been the driving force behind the attack. After weeks of testimony and deliberation, the jury returned with their verdict. Ezra was found guilty of second-degree murder, while Charles was convicted of manslaughter. The courtroom erupted in a mix of emotions: relief from Maria's family and friends, anger from Ezra's supporters, and a sense of closure for those who had followed the case. The judge sentenced Ezra to 25 years in prison, a decision that was met with both satisfaction and sorrow for Maria's loved ones. It was a measure of justice, but it could never bring her back. The trial had exposed the dark underbelly of a relationship that had seemed perfect on the surface, leaving everyone to grapple with the painful reality of what had happened. Ezra was led away in handcuffs. The courtroom emptied, but the impact of the case would linger for years to come. In the aftermath of the trial, the story of Maria's murder continued to resonate, leaving a lasting impact on everyone who had followed the case. For Maria's family and friends, the verdict brought a measure of closure, but it could never fully heal the wound left by her loss. They had lost a daughter, a sister, and a friend, a vibrant young woman whose life had been cut short in the most tragic way. In the months following the trial, Maria's parents channeled their grief into action, establishing a foundation in her name to support victims of domestic violence. The foundation aimed to raise awareness about the warning signs of abusive relationships and provide resources for those seeking help. It became a beacon of hope, turning Maria's tragedy into a force for good. The resort where the murder took place struggled to recover from the scandal, once a sought-after destination for honeymooners. It now carried a dark reputation. Guests reported feeling uneasy staying in the villa where Maria had died, and some even claimed to hear whispers or see fleeting shadows, as if her spirit still lingered. Locals spoke of the tragedy in hushed tones, and the resort's management made efforts to rebrand and distance themselves from the incident, but for many the memory of what had happened there was too vivid to forget. Ezra, now serving his 25-year sentence, became a symbol of how appearances can deceive. Behind the charming facade of the devoted husband lay a man capable of unimaginable cruelty. In prison, he maintained his innocence, writing letters to supporters and claiming he had been wrongfully convicted, but few were swayed by his protests. The evidence against him had been overwhelming, and his attempts to shift the blame onto Charles only reinforced the perception of him as manipulative and self-serving. Charles, meanwhile, served his sentence for manslaughter, a reduced charge in exchange for his cooperation. During the trial, he expressed remorse for his role in Maria's death, admitting that he had made a terrible mistake by agreeing to Ezra's plan. While some saw him as a pawn in Ezra's scheme, others believed he bore significant responsibility for the tragedy. His story served as a cautionary tale about the dangers of getting involved in situations fueled by jealousy and rage. Years after the trial, a documentary crew revisited the case, uncovering new details that added another layer of complexity to the story. They interviewed key figures, including investigators, witnesses, and Maria's loved ones, piecing together a comprehensive account of what had happened. One of the most shocking revelations came from a former cellmate of Ezra, who claimed that Ezra had confessed to orchestrating Maria's murder as part of a plan to claim the life insurance money. While this confession couldn't be verified, it aligned with the financial motives that had been uncovered during the trial. The documentary also shed light on Maria's life, celebrating her as more than just a victim. Friends and family shared stories of her kindness, her infectious laugh, and her unwavering optimism. They spoke of her dreams for the future, dreams that had been tragically cut short. The documentary served as a reminder that behind every true crime story is a real person, someone who was loved, and whose loss left a void in the lives of those who knew them. For Maria's community, her death became a catalyst for change. Schools and organizations began offering workshops on healthy relationships and the warning signs of abuse, aiming to prevent similar tragedies from happening. Maria's story was shared widely, not to sensationalize. Thanks for watching True Crime Cases.